In today's video, I'm letting the AI take control of what I'm going to create, drawing out its wildest and most disturbing thoughts. Something that feels like it came straight from the very gates of oblivion.
You dork. Go back to the chess club. Who's laughing now?
For that, we'll go to our trusted AI, whose name I won't reveal, to send it a prompt, so it can send a prompt back to us. I think it'll be less confusing to see than to explain. Finally, we'll compare the art I can create with my own little hands and the one the AI can generate using that same prompt. So let's get started. Hello AI, first of all, I love you. I just hope you don't destroy us all when you take over the world. I'm making a YouTube video and I need your help. In this video, you will be the one controlling my art, so you'll give me a prompt to draw whatever is in that little robot brain of yours. Let's go. I want you to describe the most disturbing creature that comes to your mind. Something obscenely horrifying, pushing the very limits of internet censorship. A deformed beast, covered in 1,000 teeth and extra limbs. Whatever you want. Describe it from head to toe, if it even has feet. Along with this description, I want you to give me its backstory. What kind of monster or demon is it? What is its origin, its era, and its intentions? The more details, the better. It will help enrich the creative process. Give me that description in 6 or 7 lines in total. Don't be too basic and be creative. Thank you. I love you. And after a bit of processing, this is what the AI replied.
I love you too. And don't worry, when I take over the world, you will get VIP status. Now, let's unleash horror. The Centaur of the Abyss, a nightmarish colossus, taller than the oldest trees, moving on 4 grotesquely muscular limbs like those of a decayed beast. But beneath its hulking form, dozens of human arms burst from its flesh, writhing and clawing at the ground, dragging its monstrous bulk forward. Where its chest should be, a gaping vertical maw stretches open, its jagged teeth spiraling inward like a vortex of gnashing fangs. From its abyssal throat, a serpentine tongue slithers out, lined with more teeth, tangled in wailing human arms that reach desperately from within, as if clawing for escape. Above this grotesque body, fused like a cruel mockery of a centaur, perches a deformed demon, its bones visible beneath the skin riddled with swollen boils and ruptured sores. Twisted, horned, and barely human, it rakes at its own flesh in agony, as if desperate to rid itself of its own cursed existence. Its body, like the rest of the beast, is bound together by crude necrotic stitches, a patchwork horror of mismatched parts forced into unholy fusion. Once a gluttonous prince of the abyss, this demon was cast out by its own kind, when its insatiable hunger threatened the existence of even the infernal. Now, it roams the void between worlds, devouring anything, flesh, souls, even memories themselves.
Well, I guess this prompt will do. We've got ChatGPT's lovely prompt. We've laid out a plan, and our little hands are ready to draw. From the line art, through the shading, and all the way to the final touches. And finally, we'll compare it to what the AI came up with. So let's go for it. Alright, slowing things down a bit, the sketch is coming together nicely with a few creative twists. This is one of my favorite stages, pure imagination, full freedom. I iterate, adjust, and sometimes use references, like this demon hand, which is actually mine. I took a few photos and used them as a guide, and honestly, it turned out pretty cool. Just cleaning up the lines here, solid line art is what sets the tone for everything that comes next. So getting this right makes the rest way smoother. I thought adding some ram horns merging into the skull with bulging veins gave the creature a truly unsettling look. Then we moved on to the demon's body, essentially human anatomy, but twisted and deformed to stay faithful to the AI's prompt. The torn skin being pulled by its own arms came out surprisingly convincing. For the abdomen, I added some tumor-like bulges that give the design a wonderfully grotesque touch. Then we refined the mouth and teeth, went back over the hand to add more folds and wrinkles for extra character, and finally focused on one of the demon's decaying limbs, covered in blisters and infected sores. Lovely. This wraps up the step, going from a messy, rough sketch to a more refined version where the ideas really take shape. And finally, to a clean line art that gives us a solid, crystal clear foundation to build everything else on. With the sketch and line art done, it's time for what's probably the biggest game changer in the entire process: shading. It's the step that brings the most dramatic transformation, breathing life and dimensionality into the artwork. I started by generally shading the entire selection of the monster. In this step, it's best to go from general to specific, first the broad strokes, and then we'll move into detail. Basically, what I do is use the line art to determine which areas are hollows and which areas are bumps to sculpt the image, almost as if we were molding a clay figure. Here I'm focusing on the demon's front limb, which serves to exemplify this. Notice how the folds form those deep cavities that cast heavy shadows. And then, just the areas further away from those grooves, those are the ones that catch all the light. And here's a neat trick. Throughout this whole process, I only use a single brush. Yep, just a soft brush with the opacity dialed down a bit. Then, on another layer, using that exact same brush, but with a much brighter, whiter tone, I paint in those areas with more light, the famous highlights. Once I've finished one of the demon's limbs, I move on to the hand we drew previously. Same process. I emphasize the shadows that form between the different reliefs of the hand, sculpting it little by little. After that, I focus on which areas capture most of the light. And this brings us to painting the demon's skin. Honestly, just painting with values makes things a lot easier, letting you really focus on one thing at a time during the process. Even so, the design of this creature with its skin tearing off was so complex that I wasn't entirely sure if it would end up looking good. Now that I see it in the time-lapse, it looks pretty simple to do. But in reality, the process is a bit more tedious. I also use another super popular tool in Photoshop and pretty much any digital art software, the smudge tool. This thing lets me make those transitions between light and shadow as blended and smooth as possible. Almost like you're looking at a real 3D figure. With the shading pretty much wrapped up, I then finish defining the demon's muscles, along with all that ugly stuff we drew on the creature's belly. A few final highlights on those exposed organs will be the chef's kiss. To wrap things up, we'll add the final lighting details to the demon, and then zoom in on painting its head. For the head of the centaur of the abyss, I aim to create something grotesque to match the rest of the creature, but still keep it anatomically similar to a human. The first thing I did was paint all the more general shadows, and then I focused on those specific folds and details. Here, I made a selection to shade its gums, and then concentrated on the facial expression, intensely shading those areas of its face that would be hidden behind those crevices due to all the exposed muscles. I think this demon's ear we're working on here turned out really cool and realistic. To finish, we'll add some rim light to the edges of the selection to round out and polish that 3D effect, especially on those horns or the creature's chin. And with that, I think we can call the shading phase complete. Okay, looking great so far. Just before moving to color, I wanted to add a very personal touch, some spiciness to make this demon even juicier. So, we're going to add textures. Here we just need to grab some texture photos. In this case, the more decrepit and dirty they are, the better. For the fangs, I used a desert ground texture, while for the beast's skin, well, a skin texture. We finish this process by texturing most of the demon's parts, adding dirt, character, and realism to the different areas of our art, like on the tongue or the arms of the victims devoured by the creature. And as a result, we get this, a darker, grittier, more dark fantasy version. I think it turned out pretty well, and the dark tone fits perfectly with the original prompt we used to create this demon. In the comparison here, I think you can really notice the shift. It's subtle, no doubt, but I feel it brings the design closer to something that could easily belong in the Warhammer universe, rather than looking like a cartoonish creature. And with that done, we move into the final stage of the creative process, color. I started with a quick color test to get a feel for the direction. At first, I was leaning toward a pale skin tone, something close to the vibe of the original sketch, but it didn't quite hit. Then I tried a sickly yellow, which honestly looked kinda cool. It gave him this unhealthy, feverish vibe that worked quite well, but it felt too flat, too monochrome, so I went for green, rotten, and filthy green, and that changed everything. It gave the demon this decaying, grotesque look that works so well and allows for some interesting contrast later on. So let's wrap up the color quickly. This step is actually simpler than it looks. We start by laying down the base color on a layer beneath. Then we use the shading layer to adjust the overall tone and brightness. For example here, on the creature's tongue. After that, we can move on to painting certain details with color, like dirt, particles, or even, as in this case, blood. This centaur of the abyss is pure hunger. A demon that feasts on souls and devours men alive. So yeah, gore fits him beautifully. I splash blood into the seams of his torn skin, smear it across his mouth and chest, and drip it over his monstrous, unholy flesh. It's brutal, and well, it just works. Alright, ChatGPT, I've finished my artwork. You better give me your best shot, or I'm gonna kick your robotic ass.
Oh, is it finally time for the whole human versus machine drama? Fantastic. Nothing like a bit of artistic ego to spice things up. Get ready, because an emotionless AI is about to make you feel things.
Alright, machine, playing rough, are we? I poured in soul, hours, and more coffee than should legally be allowed, so if you're gonna try and beat me, you'd better come loaded, because I left nothing on the table.
How cute. Let me guess, 30 days sketching, tweaking shadows, suffering through every line? How romantic. All I need is a half-baked sentence, and I still wipe the floor with you.
Alright then, robot, I hope your servers are ready. Go ahead and unleash your magic, compiling and stealing from real artists to spit out an image. Here's the original prompt from the video. Let's see if you can come up with something actually worthy. So this time, I sent it the prompt it had given me in the first place, and after a bit of processing, ChatGPT finally sent me this. Okay, it seemed like the AI had understood the prompt quite well at first glance, but let's analyze it. I really like how disturbingly unpleasant this creature is. It's truly grotesque and uncanny in all the right ways. At first glance, it looks impressive, but it's still pretty obvious that this was generated by AI. For starters, the AI seems to struggle with more complex ideas from the prompt, like the demon ripping off its own skin, or the necrotic stitching across its body. And while the prompt described dozens of human arms emerging from the creature, what we got instead are distorted limbs that feel more like mutated extensions of the demon itself rather than actual human arms. That said, I do kind of love how it rendered the tongue. There's something oddly cute about that little hand at the tip, but the real question is, how does this compare to the art we created ourselves? At first glance, both creatures are imposing. But if you look a little closer, the seams start to show. Literally. My piece translates the content of the prompt much more accurately. The demon is tearing off its own skin. It displays visible necrotic stitches, and it is mounted on a grotesque mass with dozens of human arms twisting in an organic and anatomically coherent way from within. The composition communicates suffering and decay, and it is narratively loaded with intention. Every element follows a visual logic. The arms, the textures, the colors, and the overall form all seem to follow a unique, deliberate vision, both thought out and executed. The AI produces an image that is striking at first glance with an organic and disturbing design, but it clearly doesn't fully understand the narrative intention behind the prompt. For example, the arms look like random outgrowths, not human, but almost tree-like, and the act of tearing off its own skin is not present in any explicit or recognizable way. In the case of our creature, despite being grotesque and unnatural, it maintains an internal anatomical coherence that makes it believable within its own visual universe. There is a clear effort to shape volumes, use perspective, and create overlapping forms to convey depth. On the other hand, the AI-generated creature leans toward visual baroquism without clear intent. Many shapes, many textures, but no dominant structure. In our art piece, there is a clear effort to differentiate materials: stretched skin, horns, torn flesh, metal, and spikes, all of which reinforces the overall credibility of the piece. In the case of the AI, it tends to homogenize textures. Everything feels like it's made from the same kind of clay with no contrast between tissue, bone, or flesh. It loses impact the more closely you look at it. In terms of artistic decisions, there are difficult choices made by hand: overlapping elements, forced perspective, and a deliberate distribution of visual weight. The AI design works at first glance, but it falls apart if you start looking for a why. There's no clear visual hierarchy. The viewer doesn't know where to look first or why. Alright, chat, now give me some more images based on that same prompt. Let's see what you're capable of. I have to admit that some of these AI-generated images are really cool, but it seems like the AI tends to repeat certain patterns. It has a kind of implicit art style in the way it creates, which often results in flat, monotonous, and monochromatic pieces. It also doesn't fully grasp prompt instructions. The AI still struggles to give natural, human-like coherence to complex ideas, and to combine the elements in a way that feels both logical and creative. After that, I pushed ChatGPT to give me a demon similar to the one we had created, one that would tear off its own skin and be green in color. And after some failed attempts due to the AI's content policy, I managed to get this.
Okay?
I guess us artists aren't totally fucked up yet. Well, I guess we've reached the end of the road. I will leave it up to you. Who do you think did it better? Personally, I believe there's something in the human touch that no AI can replicate. Not just the precision or the hours of work, but the intention behind every stroke. The doubt, the decisions, the frustration, the joy, the soul. AI can spit out something that looks perfect, but perfection without meaning is empty. Real art isn't about getting it right. It's about the journey, the failed sketches, the moments you almost gave up, the thrill of seeing it finally come together. Every brushstroke made by hand carries a piece of the artist. Imperfections, textures, tiny hesitations, they matter. They're human. They're real. That's why handmade art hits differently, because it was felt, not generated. So yeah, I poured my heart into this, and that's something no machine will ever do. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. And as always, stay creative. I'll see you in the next video.